In the cold depths of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a universal truth that even the most advanced species acknowledge. Some things are better left alone. The Galactic Council had strict protocols about quarantined worlds, abandoned colonies, and the creatures that inhabit them. For 3,000 years, these rules had kept the galaxy safe from horrors beyond imagination. But humans? Humans had never been good at following rules. When the distress beacon from Kepler 442c began broadcasting across 17 star systems, every species in the sector did exactly what protocol demanded. They logged the signal, marked the system as hazardous, and moved on. The planet had been abandoned for good reason. The previous inhabitants had left behind warnings in 47 different languages, all saying the same thing. The afflicted remain. Do not land. Do not engage. Let them die in darkness. The humans, however, heard something different in that beacon. Where others heard a warning, they heard a cry for help. Where others saw a quarantined death world, they saw someone in need. And when the rest of the galaxy turned away, humans did what they always do. They rolled up their sleeves, loaded their ships, and flew straight toward the danger. This is the story of why the galaxy learned to both fear and respect that uniquely human trait. The absolute inability to abandon those who suffer, no matter how dangerous, how alien, or how forsaken they might be. Captain Sarah Chen stared at the holographic display floating above her command table, her weathered hands gripping the edges as she studied the data streaming in from their long-range sensors. The bridge of the UES, Mercy's Hand, was quiet except for the gentle hum of life support systems and the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. Her crew of 12 specialists worked at their stations, each one hand-picked for this mission that the Galactic Council had deemed both impossible and inadvisable. "Captain, we're receiving the distress signal again," reported Lieutenant Marcus Webb from the communications station. His voice carried the weight of the past 6 months they'd spent tracking this transmission across 3-star systems. Same pattern, same frequency. "It's definitely automated, but there's something else embedded in the carrier wave." Sarah moved to stand behind Webb's chair, her eyes scanning the wavelength analysis on his screen. At 45, she had spent more than half her life in space, first as a rescue specialist in the outer colony conflicts, then as a medical officer on exploration vessels. She had seen humanity at its best and worst among the stars, but she had never encountered anything like the situation they were approaching. "Can you isolate it?" she asked, placing a reassuring hand on the young officer's shoulder. Webb's fingers danced across his console, applying filters and enhancement algorithms that were cutting-edge even by human standards. Slowly, beneath the mechanical repetition of the distress beacon, another sound emerged. It was organic, almost musical, but carried undertones that made everyone on the bridge shift uncomfortably in their seats. "It sounds like singing," whispered Dr. Elena Vasquez from the medical station. The xenobiologist had joined their crew specifically for this mission, her expertise in alien physiology making her invaluable for what they might encounter. "But it's not coming from the beacon's point of origin." The acoustic signature suggests it's much closer to the planet's surface. Prioritis.
However, Sarah nodded, her mind already working through the implications. The Kepler of the name, bodies.
442c system had been nothing more than a footnote in the Galactic Council's database of quarantined worlds. The planet had been abandoned by its original inhabitants, a species called the Cathara, nearly 500 years ago. According to the official records, they had encountered something on that world that had forced them to evacuate completely, leaving behind warnings in dozens of languages and a permanent quarantine beacon. Most species would have respected that quarantine. The Cathara were known throughout the galaxy as careful, methodical beings who didn't abandon worlds lightly. If they had fled something on Kepler 442c, conventional wisdom suggested it was best left alone. But 3 months ago, the quarantine beacon had begun transmitting something new alongside its standard warning. The distress signal that now echoed through the Mercy's Hand was unlike anything in the standard galactic communication protocols. It was desperate, alien, and undeniably a call for help. "Commander Torres, what's our ETA to the outer system?" Sarah called to her second-in-command, a former military officer whose tactical expertise had proven invaluable in their previous rescue missions. 18 hours at current speed, Captain," replied Nuria Torres from the navigation console. Her voice was steady, professional, but Sarah caught the slight tension that indicated Torres shared her concerns about this mission. "However, I should note that we're already receiving scanner data that contradicts some of the information in the Galactic Council files." Sarah moved to the main display, where Torres was highlighting their sensor readings. The planet Kepler 442c hung before them as a three-dimensional model, its surface marked with various data points and atmospheric readings. According to the Council's records, the planet should be uninhabitable, Torres continued. Toxic atmosphere, no detectable life signs, surface temperatures that would kill most known species. But our sensors are reading something completely different. The planet's atmosphere showed as breathable, with oxygen levels that would support human life. Temperature readings indicated a temperate climate with seasonal variations. Most surprisingly, their bioscanners were detecting massive amounts of organic activity across the planet's surface. "Could there be an error in our equipment?" asked Ensign David Park from the engineering station. The youngest member of their crew, Park, had nonetheless proven his worth during their journey with his innovative solutions to technical problems. "Doctor." Vasquez shook her head, her dark eyes fixed on the biological readings streaming across her console. "I've run 3 complete diagnostic cycles on our sensors. They're functioning perfectly. Whatever's down there, it's alive, and there's a lot of it." Sarah felt the familiar weight of command settling on her shoulders. Every rescue mission involved unknowns, but this situation was unlike anything she had encountered in her 20-year career. The distress signal suggested beings in need of help, but the planet's mysterious transformation from dead world to thriving ecosystem raised questions that made her instincts scream warnings. "Captain!" Webb's voice cut through her thoughts. "I'm detecting multiple energy signatures from the planet's surface. They appear to be artificial structures, but they don't match any known architectural patterns in the galactic database." The main display shifted to show thermal imaging of the planet's largest continent. Scattered across its surface were geometric patterns that glowed with their own internal heat. Some were vast spirals that stretched for kilometers. Others were complex lattices that seemed to pulse with rhythmic energy. All of them appeared to be constructed from some form of organic material that their scanners couldn't identify. "Are those cities?" Torres asked, her tactical training making her analyze the structures for potential threats or defensive positions. "They're too organic to be cities as we understand them," Dr. Vasquez replied, her voice filled with scientific curiosity. "The heat signatures suggest they're living structures, possibly grown rather than built. And look at this pattern here." She highlighted a section of the display where several structures were connected by what appeared to be flowing streams of energy. "These connections are pulsing in rhythm with the signal we've been receiving." Sarah studied the display for several long minutes, her mind working through the implications. Whatever had happened on Kepler 442c since the Catharo evacuation, it had transformed the planet into something unprecedented. The distress signal was coming from somewhere in the middle of those organic structures, and if Dr. Abebege Vasquez was correct, the entire network was somehow involved in generating the call for help. "Captain, we have another problem," Webb reported, his voice tight with concern. "I'm detecting an incoming transmission. It's from a Galactic Council patrol ship, and they're ordering us to leave the system immediately." The main display flickered and was replaced by the blue-scale, dignified features of a Cathara commander. Sarah recognized the species immediately. Tall, slender beings with 4 arms and large, multifaceted eyes that could process visual information far beyond human capability. This particular Cathara wore the formal uniform of a Council enforcement officer, and his expression was grave. Human vessel Mercy's Hand. "This is Commander Zeph Kayla, of the Council ship Vigilant Dawn. You are in violation of Galactic Quarantine Protocol 77 Alpha. You must leave this system immediately or face immediate detention." Sarah moved to the center of the bridge, straightening her uniform as she prepared to respond. She had dealt with Council bureaucracy before, but never in a situation like this. "Commander Zeph, Kala, this is Captain Sarah Chen. We are responding to a distress signal originating from the surface of Kepler 442c. Under Galactic Rescue Protocol, we have both the right and obligation to investigate." The Cathara commander's 4 arms moved in what Sarah recognized as an expression of extreme agitation. "Captain Chen, you do not understand the situation. The quarantine of Kepler 442c was established by my people for the protection of all galactic life. What remains on that planet cannot be helped, cannot be saved, and must not be allowed to spread. With respect, Commander, our sensors indicate significant life signs and what appears to be an organized civilization on the planet's surface. The distress signal we've been tracking suggests beings in need of assistance." Zeth Kala's large eyes seemed to focus directly on Sarah through the communication link. and she could see something that looked like fear in their multifaceted depths. Captain, my ancestors were among those who fled that world 500 years ago. The records they left behind speak of an infection that changes not just the body, but the very essence of what a being is. The Afflicted are not the same creatures we once knew. They are something else, something that spreads its condition to any who make contact. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. Commander, what exactly is the nature of this affliction? Our medical sensors aren't detecting any pathogens or toxic substances in the planet's atmosphere. The Cathara commander was quiet for several seconds, his forearms moving in what appeared to be a gesture of mourning. Doctor, your sensors cannot detect what changes the Afflicted because it is not a disease as your species understands such things. It is something that alters the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. Those who are touched by it cease to be individuals and become part of something larger, something that thinks and acts as a collective entity. A hive mind? Sarah asked, her medical training making her think of various parasitic organisms that could influence behavior. No, Captain. Something far more complex and far more dangerous. The Afflicted retain their individual memories and personalities, but they also share a collective consciousness that spans their entire species. They can feel the pain and joy of every member of their group, can share thoughts and experiences instantaneously across vast distances, and most terrifyingly, they can extend that connection to other species through physical contact. Torres stepped up beside Sarah, her tactical instincts engaged. Are you saying they can infect other species with this collective consciousness? Not infect, Commander Torres. Transform. Those who join the Afflicted do so willingly because the experience of shared consciousness is said to be so profound that individual existence seems empty and meaningless in comparison. My people fled because entire research teams were volunteering to undergo the transformation rather than return to individual consciousness. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as the implications became clear. If Commander Zethkala was telling the truth, then the beings calling for help from Kepler 442c might not be prisoners of some terrible condition, but willing participants in a form of existence that other species found terrifying. Commander, if what you're saying is accurate, then why are they transmitting a distress signal? Why would a collective consciousness that's supposedly voluntary call for outside help? Zethkala's expression became even more grave, his forearms folding in what Sarah recognized as a gesture of deep concern. That, Captain Chen, is precisely what worries the Galactic Council. In 500 years of quarantine, the Afflicted have never attempted to communicate with the outside galaxy. The fact that they are doing so now suggests that something has changed, something that may pose a threat to every sentient species in this region of space. The bridge fell silent as the crew absorbed this information. Sarah could feel the weight of decision pressing down on her. Every instinct she had as a rescue specialist told her to respond to the distress call, to help beings in need, regardless of the potential dangers. But the fear in Commander Zethkala's voice was genuine, and the Galactic Council's warnings were not given lightly. Captain, Doctor, Vasquez spoke quietly. I've been analyzing the biological readings from the planet's surface while we've been talking. Whatever's happening down there, it's accelerating. The organic structures are growing larger, and the energy patterns connecting them are becoming more complex. Something is definitely changing. Sarah looked around at her crew, seeing the mixture of curiosity, fear, and determination in their faces. These were good people, specialists who had volunteered for dangerous rescue missions because they believed in helping those in need. But this situation was unlike anything they had trained for. Commander Zethkala, she said finally, I appreciate the Council's concerns, and I understand the historical context of this quarantine. But as representatives of humanity, we cannot ignore a distress call, regardless of its source. We will maintain safe distance and investigate the signal using remote probes and sensors. If we determine that the situation poses a genuine threat to galactic security, we will withdraw immediately.
The Cathara commander's arms moved in what Sarah interpreted as resignation.
Captain Chen, I cannot stop you from proceeding. But I must inform you that the Galactic Council will consider any direct contact with the Afflicted to be a violation of quarantine protocols.
The Vigilant Dawn will remain at the edge of the system to monitor your activities and intervene if necessary. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Mercy's hand in tense silence. Sarah could feel her crew looking to her for guidance, waiting for orders that would determine not just their fate, but potentially the fate of every being they might encounter on the planet below. All right, people, she said finally, her voice steady and confident. We came here to respond to a distress call, and that's what we're going to do. Torres, I want a full tactical analysis of those surface structures. Vasquez, prepare your medical sensors for detailed biological scans. Webb, keep monitoring all communications frequencies. If there's more to this signal than we're hearing, I want to know about it. She paused, looking out at the planet hanging in the view screen before them. Kepler. 442c looked peaceful from this distance, its blue and green surface unmarked by the complex questions surrounding its inhabitants. Park, I want you to prepare a full suite of remote probes. We're going to investigate the situation thoroughly before making any decisions about direct contact. Whatever's happening down there, whatever these afflicted really are, we're going to find out the truth. As her crew moved to carry out their orders, Sarah remained at the center of the bridge, staring at the planet that held so many mysteries. In 18 hours, they would be close enough to deploy their probes and begin the investigation that would determine whether the beings below were victims in need of rescue or something far more complex and potentially dangerous. Either way, she knew that humanity's reputation for rushing in where other species feared to tread was about to be tested in ways none of them could imagine. The question was whether their compassion would prove to be humanity's greatest strength or its most dangerous weakness. The probe bay of the Mercy's Hand bustled with activity, as Ensign Park made final adjustments to the array of sensors and communication equipment they would be deploying to the planet's surface. Sarah watched from the observation deck as her youngest crew member worked with the focused intensity that had made him invaluable during their previous missions. Each probe was roughly the size of a basketball, packed with enough sophisticated equipment to analyze everything from atmospheric composition to complex biological interactions. Probe array is ready for deployment, Captain, Park reported through the intercom. I've programmed them for a comprehensive survey pattern that will cover all the major organic structures we detected. Each probe has a 48-hour operational window and full real-time communication capability. Sarah nodded, her attention split between Park's preparations and the data streaming in from their orbital sensors. In the 6 hours since their conversation with Commander Zeth Kala, the changes on the planet's surface had become even more pronounced. The organic structures were not just growing, they were reorganizing themselves into increasingly complex patterns that seemed to pulse with coordinated energy. Dr. Vasquez, what's your assessment of the biological activity down there? Sarah asked as the xenobiologist joined her at the observation window. It's unlike anything in the known biological database, Dr. Vasquez replied, her voice filled with scientific wonder tinged by concern. The structures appear to be constructed from a form of living tissue that can manipulate its own cellular density and energy output. They're not just buildings, they're organs, parts of a massive biological system that spans the entire planet. Sarah studied the readings on the portable display that Vasquez carried. The thermal imagery showed streams of energy flowing between the structures like a vast circulatory system carrying information and resources across continents in patterns that seemed almost purposeful. Are we looking at a single organism or a collection of organisms working together? That's what we need to find out, Vasquez said. The energy patterns suggest coordinated activity on a planetary scale, but the individual structures maintain their own distinct biological signatures. It's as if the entire planet has become a single entity while still preserving the individuality of its component parts. Before Sarah could respond, Webb's voice crackled through the ship's communication system. Captain, we're receiving a new transmission from the planet's surface. This one's different from the distress signal. It appears to be directed specifically at us. Sarah and Vasquez hurried back to the bridge where Webb was already working to clean up the signal. As the static cleared, a voice emerged from the speakers. Unmistakably alien, but speaking in clear, if accented, standard galactic. Human vessel, we greet you with gratitude and hope. We are the collective of Kepler 442c, formerly known by many names, but now united in purpose and thought. We have been calling across the stars for assistance, and you are the first to answer. The bridge fell silent as the crew absorbed the implications of hearing direct communication from the afflicted. Sarah stepped forward, her hand hovering over the communication controls. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the UES Mercy's Hand. We received your distress signal and came to investigate. What kind of assistance do you require? There was a pause before the response came, and when it did, there was an unmistakable note of surprise in the alien voice. You came to help us? Despite the warnings that surely surround our world, despite the fear that our existence inspires in other species? That's correct, Sarah replied firmly. Humanity believes that no one should suffer alone, regardless of their circumstances. We're here to help if we can. The pause that followed was longer, filled with what sounded like multiple voices discussing something in the background. When the primary speaker returned, there was an emotional quality to their voice that hadn't been there before. Captain Chen, we must be honest with you about our nature. We are what other species call the Afflicted. Beings who have been transformed by a symbiotic consciousness that allows us to share thoughts, emotions, and experiences across our entire population. We know that this terrifies most species, but it has given us capabilities and perspectives that individual consciousness cannot achieve. Torres moved closer to Sarah, her tactical training making her analyze every word for potential threats. Why are you transmitting a distress signal? What kind of help do you need? Commander Torres, we can sense your wariness, and we understand it. Our distress signal is not for ourselves. We are content and fulfilled in ways that individual consciousness cannot comprehend. Our signal is for the others, the ones who came to our world and became lost between individual and collective existence. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Others? You mean other species have made contact with you?
Over the past several months, yes.
First was a small research vessel from the Hegemony Council, then a trading ship from the Stellar Republic. Most recently, the Kethara science team arrived, despite their species' historical fear of our world. All came in secret, driven by curiosity about what we had become. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her scientific instincts engaged. What happened to these visitors? The voice that replied carried deep sadness and frustration. They are trapped, Dr. Vasquez. The symbiotic consciousness that transformed our people cannot be forced upon others. It must be chosen freely, with full understanding of what it means. But these visitors were not prepared for the transition. They began the transformation but could not complete it, leaving them suspended between individual and collective existence. The implications hit the bridge crew like a physical blow. Sarah could see the horror in her team's faces as they realized that the distress signal wasn't coming from the Afflicted themselves, but from visitors who had become caught in a process they couldn't complete or reverse. How many beings are we talking about? Sarah asked, her rescue instincts overriding her concerns about the strange nature of the situation. 47 individuals from 6 different species, including 3 Kethara from the most recent expedition. They are alive and conscious, but they exist in constant confusion and pain as their minds struggle to bridge individual and collective thought processes. We have tried to help them, but we cannot force them to complete the transition, nor can we reverse what has already begun. Torres was already running calculations on her tactical display. Captain, if we're looking at a rescue operation for 47 beings, we'll need to know more about their condition and the risks involved in extracting them. Commander Torres, the risks are significant. The alien voice responded, apparently able to hear their conversation. The partially transformed beings cannot survive long outside our atmospheric and biological environment. Their bodies have begun adapting to the symbiotic organisms, but without complete transformation, those adaptations are unstable. Sarah rubbed her forehead, feeling the weight of a rescue scenario unlike any she had ever encountered. What would be required to help these beings? Are we talking about medical treatment, environmental support, or something else entirely? That is why we called for help, Captain Chen. We believe that with the right medical and technological assistance, it might be possible to either complete their transformation or reverse it entirely. But we lack the expertise to work with such diverse species, and we fear that our attempts to help may actually be making their condition worse. Dr. Vasquez was already bringing up medical data on her portable display, her mind racing through the implications of partial symbiotic transformation. I would need to examine these beings directly to understand their condition. Are they lucid? Can they communicate their preferences about treatment options? Some are lucid, Doctor, though their consciousness fluctuates between individual and collective states. Others have retreated entirely into their own minds and cannot be reached. But those who can still communicate have expressed a desperate desire to either complete their transformation or return to their original state. The suspended existence they're experiencing is described as constantly shifting between ecstasy and agony. Sarah looked around at her crew, seeing determination mixed with fear in their faces. This wasn't a simple rescue operation. It was a complex medical and ethical situation that could have far-reaching implications for galactic relations. We'll need to deploy our probes first to assess the situation, Sarah decided. Then, if it's safe, we'll send down a medical team to examine these beings and determine what treatment options are available. Captain, Webb interjected, I'm receiving an urgent transmission from Commander Zethkala. His ship is moving into an intercept course. The main screen flickered to life, showing the concerned face of the Kethara commander. Captain Chen, We have been monitoring your communications with the planet. I must inform you that 3 of the beings trapped in this partial transformation are from my crew. Scientists who disobeyed orders and attempted to investigate the Afflicted against direct instructions from the Galactic Council. Commander, we're planning a rescue mission for all the trapped beings, including your people, Sarah replied. Zethkala's 4 arms moved in what Sarah now recognized as extreme agitation. Captain, you do not understand the political implications of this situation. If it becomes known that Council species have been secretly visiting this quarantined world, it will destabilize the entire galactic government. The quarantine was established not just to protect other species from transformation, but to maintain the social and political order that keeps our diverse civilizations functioning. Taurus stepped up beside Sarah, her expression grim. Commander, are you suggesting we should abandon these beings to protect political stability? I am suggesting that some situations are too complex and dangerous to resolve through rescue operations, Zethkala replied. The partially transformed beings pose a unique threat. They cannot return to normal society because they carry the symbiotic organisms, but they cannot integrate with the Afflicted because their transformation is incomplete. Attempting to help them may only create a new category of being that threatens the stability of both individual and collective consciousness. Sarah felt anger rising in her chest, but she kept her voice steady and professional. Commander, with respect, humanity has a different perspective on this situation. We don't believe that beings should be abandoned simply because their condition is complex or politically inconvenient. Captain Chen, the voice from the planet's surface, interjected. We appreciate your determination to help, but Commander Zethkala raises valid concerns. The partially transformed beings exist in a state that is stable but potentially dangerous. They carry symbiotic organisms that could theoretically spread to others, but their incomplete transformation means they cannot control or direct this process. Doctor? Vasquez looked up from her medical readings, her face pale but determined. Are you saying that contact with these beings could result in uncontrolled transformation of our crew? The risk exists, Doctor, but it is manageable with proper precautions. The symbiotic organisms require prolonged contact and emotional openness to begin the transformation process. Physical contact alone is not sufficient. There must be a psychological willingness to connect with collective consciousness. Sarah considered this information carefully. The rescue mission was becoming increasingly complex, involving not just medical challenges, but political and psychological risks that could affect her entire crew. I need more information before making any decisions, Sarah announced. Park, deploy the probe array for a complete survey of the surface conditions and the trapped beings' locations. Vasquez, I want a full analysis of the biological risks involved in potential contact. Torres, work with Commander Zethkala to understand the political implications of this situation. As her crew moved to carry out these orders, Sarah remained focused on the communication link with the planet. We'll need to speak directly with some of the trapped beings if possible. I want to understand their condition and their preferences before determining how to proceed. That can be arranged, Captain Chen. We will establish communication links with those who are currently lucid. But we must warn you that speaking with them may be emotionally challenging. Their suspended state causes them significant distress. Within minutes, Webb had established a communication link to the surface. The first voice that came through the speakers was unmistakably Kethara, but strained and confused in a way that immediately made Sarah's chest tighten with sympathy. Human vessel. This is Research Specialist Vethram of the Kethara Science Council. I am trapped between states of being that should not exist simultaneously. I can feel the thoughts of every being on this planet, but I cannot shut out my own individual consciousness. The experience is like being constantly torn between solitude and connection, creating a form of existence that brings both enlightenment and madness. Specialist Vethram, this is Captain Chen. We're here to help. Do you have a preference for treatment? Would you prefer to complete the transformation or return to your original state? There was a long pause before the response came, and when it did, the voice seemed to shift between different perspectives mid-sentence. I don't know anymore, Captain. The collective consciousness shows me wonders beyond imagination, connections and understanding that individual thought cannot achieve. But my Kethara identity screams for the privacy and autonomy that defined my existence before. How do you choose between becoming something greater and remaining who you are? The pain in the alien's voice was unmistakable, and Sarah could see similar distress reflected in her crew's faces. This wasn't a simple medical condition. It was an existential crisis that touched on fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness and identity. We'll find a way to help you, Sarah promised, though she wasn't sure how such a promise could be kept. You shouldn't have to remain trapped in this condition.
Thank you, Captain, Vethram replied, and for a moment his voice sounded purely individual again.
Your species' compassion gives us hope that a solution might exist. But please be careful. The transformation process affects each species differently, and we do not fully understand how it might interact with human consciousness. As the communication ended, Sarah looked around at her crew and realized that they were facing a rescue mission unlike any in galactic history. The trapped beings weren't just suffering from a medical condition, they were caught between two completely different ways of existing, unable to fully embrace either one. The question was whether human medical science and determination could find a solution that would allow these beings to choose their own fate, or whether some forms of suffering were too complex and fundamental to be resolved through rescue operations. The data streaming back from the probe array painted a picture that challenged everything the crew of the Mercy's Hand thought they knew about life and consciousness. Dr. Vasquez stood before the main display, her hands gesturing at complex biological readings that defied standard classification systems. The symbiotic organisms are unlike anything in our databases, she explained to the assembled crew. They appear to be a form of quantum-entangled consciousness that exists simultaneously at the cellular and quantum levels. Each organism maintains individual properties while participating in a collective network that spans the entire planet. Sarah studied the molecular diagrams floating in the holographic display. What does that mean for the partially transformed beings? It means they're experiencing consciousness at multiple levels simultaneously without the biological framework to process it properly, Vasquez replied. Imagine trying to hear 1,000 conversations at once while also trying to maintain your own thoughts. That's what they're dealing with every moment. Park looked up from his engineering console, where he had been analyzing the structural data from the planet's surface. Captain, I've been studying the organic structures down there. They're not just buildings or even living tissue. They're a form of biological technology that processes and distributes consciousness like our computers process data. Torres added her tactical analysis to the discussion. The trapped beings are located in what appear to be medical facilities within these organic structures. The Afflicted have been trying to help them, but their attempts may actually be prolonging the partially transformed state. Sarah absorbed this information while watching the real-time feeds from their probes. The planet's surface looked like something from a fever dream. Vast organic towers that pulsed with internal light, connected by streams of energy that flowed like liquid thought between structures. In several locations, their probes had identified the heat signatures of non-native lifeforms that must be the trapped visitors. Captain, Webb interrupted from his communication station, I'm receiving another transmission from the planet. They say they've identified a possible solution, but it requires direct human involvement. The voice that came through the speakers was the same one they had been speaking with before, but now it carried undertones of excitement and hope. Captain Chen, our collective has been analyzing the data from your probes and the biological information you've shared with us. We believe we may have identified a solution, but it requires capabilities that only your species appears to possess. What kind of capabilities? Sarah asked, though she had a growing suspicion that she wasn't going to like the answer. Humans appear to have an unusual relationship with consciousness that we have not observed in other species. Your minds can maintain individual identity while also forming temporary collective connections through empathy, team coordination, and emotional bonding. This flexibility might allow a human to serve as a bridge between individual and collective consciousness, facilitating either complete transformation or complete reversal for the trapped beings. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. Are you suggesting that a human could somehow mediate the transformation process?
Precisely, Doctor.
A human volunteer could establish temporary connections with both the trapped beings and our collective, serving as a conduit that would allow them to choose their final state with full understanding of both options. The human would experience both forms of consciousness temporarily but would retain the ability to return to individual existence afterward. The bridge fell silent as the crew absorbed the implications. Sarah felt every eye turning toward her, knowing that as captain, the decision and the risk would ultimately be hers. What are the risks to the human volunteer? She asked, her command training demanding that she understand all aspects before making any decisions. The primary risk is psychological, the voice replied honestly. The experience of collective consciousness can be overwhelming and addictive. Some individuals might choose not to return to individual existence. There is also a small but real physical risk. The symbiotic organisms would need to temporarily bond with the volunteer's nervous system, and the long-term effects of this process on human biology are unknown.
Torres stepped closer to Sarah,
her voice low but urgent.
Captain, this is exactly the kind of situation that the Galactic Council was trying to prevent. We could be risking the first human transformation into this collective consciousness. But we could also be saving 47 beings who are currently trapped in a state of constant suffering, Sarah replied. She turned to address the planet directly. Would this process definitely help the trapped beings, or would we be risking a human life for an uncertain outcome? The process should work, Captain, but we cannot guarantee success. What we can guarantee is that, without intervention, the trapped beings will continue to exist in their current state indefinitely. Their condition is stable but not sustainable. Over time, the psychological strain will damage their minds permanently. Sarah looked around at her crew, seeing the conflict in their faces. These were people who had volunteered for dangerous rescue missions, but this situation challenged the fundamental nature of what it meant to be human. Captain, Doctor, Vasquez said quietly, I volunteer for the procedure. Absolutely not, Sarah replied immediately. As captain, that responsibility is mine. With respect, Captain, it should be mine, Torres interjected. I have the psychological training to handle the stress of the situation, and my tactical experience might help me maintain perspective during the transformation process. Before Sarah could respond, another voice joined the conversation. Captain Chen, this is Commander Zefkala. I've been monitoring your communications, and I must inform you that the Galactic Council will consider any human participation in this transformation process to be a violation of species sovereignty protocols. Sarah felt anger flaring in her chest. Commander, we're talking about saving lives. 47 beings are trapped in a condition that causes them constant suffering. And I sympathize with your desire to help, Captain, but consider the broader implications. If a human successfully bridges individual and collective consciousness, it could destabilize the entire galactic political system. Species that have maintained individual consciousness for millions of years might demand access to collective transformation, while those that have always been collective might seek individual separation. The voice from the planet rejoined the conversation. Commander Zefkala raises valid concerns, but he may also be underestimating the stabilizing effect that successful bridge consciousness could have. If the transformation can be made truly voluntary and reversible, it might eliminate the fear and misunderstanding that currently drives conflicts between individual and collective species. Sarah rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of a decision that could affect not just her crew but the entire galactic community. I need to speak with the trapped beings again before making any decision. If we're going to risk this procedure, it should be at their explicit request. Webb quickly established communication links with several of the partially transformed beings. The first voice belonged to a member of a species Sarah didn't recognize. Avian, with a musical quality that was distorted by the interference of collective consciousness. Human Captain, I am Skyweaver Threxala of the Stellar Republic. I have been trapped in this state for 2 months, and each day brings new suffering. I can feel the beauty of collective thought, but I cannot embrace it fully while my individual mind screams for autonomy. Please, if there is any hope of resolution, we beg you to try. Another voice joined in, this one from a different species entirely. Captain Chen, this is Engineer Kolrath of the Hegemony Council. I echo Threxala's request. This suspended existence is worse than death. We are neither fully ourselves nor fully part of something greater. Any risk is worthwhile if it offers the chance of resolution. Sarah heard similar pleas from several other trapped beings, each one expressing the desperate hope that someone might be able to help them choose their final fate. The pain in their voices was unmistakable, and it reinforced her determination to find a solution. All right, she announced to her crew. I am making the decision as captain. We're going to attempt this procedure, and I'll be the volunteer. Captain, Torres protested. You're too valuable to risk on an experimental procedure.
Maria, that's exactly why it has to be me, Sarah replied firmly.
If this procedure works, it could revolutionize how different species interact with each other. If it fails, the responsibility should rest with the person who made the decision to try it. Dr. Vasquez was already bringing up medical protocols on her display. If you're determined to do this, Captain, I want to establish monitoring protocols and emergency extraction procedures. We'll need to maintain constant communication with you throughout the process. Agreed, Sarah said. What do we need to do to prepare? The voice from the planet provided detailed instructions for the procedure. Sarah would need to be transported to the surface and placed in one of the organic medical facilities where the trapped beings were being held. The symbiotic organisms would then establish temporary connections with her nervous system, allowing her to experience both individual and collective consciousness simultaneously. Over the following 6 hours, the crew of the Mercy's Hand worked frantically to prepare for the most unusual rescue mission in galactic history. Dr. Vasquez developed monitoring protocols that would track Sarah's biological and neurological status throughout the procedure. Park modified their shuttle to include emergency medical equipment and communication relays. Torres established tactical protocols for immediate extraction if the situation became dangerous. As they worked, Commander Zeph Kala continued to protest their plan, warning of political and biological consequences that could affect the entire galaxy. But Sarah remained determined, driven by the memory of the pain she had heard in the voices of the trapped beings. When the shuttle descended through Kepler 442c's atmosphere, Sarah was struck by the alien beauty of the world below. The organic structures rose from the planet's surface like living mountains, their surfaces pulsing with patterns of light that seemed to respond to the shuttle's approach. Streams of energy flowed between the structures like rivers of thought, creating a landscape that was both beautiful and deeply unsettling. The landing site was a flat area near one of the largest organic complexes, where several of the trapped beings were being held. As Sarah stepped out of the shuttle, she was immediately struck by the planet's atmosphere. It was breathable for humans, but it carried scents and sensations that suggested a world profoundly transformed by collective consciousness. Representatives of the Afflicted were waiting for her, beings that had once been various species but now shared a common appearance of serenity and interconnectedness. They moved with coordinated purpose, but each retained individual characteristics that marked their original species. "Captain Chen," one of them said, speaking with the same voice they had heard over the communicators, "we are honored by your courage and your species' commitment to helping others. Are you ready to begin?" Sarah nodded, checking the communication link with her ship one final time. "Dr. Vasquez, are you reading my biological signs clearly?" "All systems are functioning normally, Captain. We're ready to monitor you throughout the procedure." As Sarah followed the Afflicted into the organic medical facility, she was amazed by the structure's interior. The walls pulsed with gentle light, and the floor seemed to respond to their footsteps with subtle shifts in color and texture. They passed chambers where the trapped beings rested, each one surrounded by organic support systems that maintained their unstable condition. In the central chamber, Sarah was positioned on a living platform that adjusted itself to support her body perfectly. Around her, the walls began to glow more brightly, and she could feel something in the air that seemed to reach toward her consciousness. "Captain," the Afflicted representative said, "the procedure will begin with gentle contact between the symbiotic organisms and your nervous system. You will gradually begin to sense the thoughts and feelings of others, first individually and then collectively. At any time, you can choose to withdraw from the connection." As the procedure began, Sarah felt a tingling sensation that started at the base of her skull and spread throughout her nervous system. Gradually, she became aware of other minds around her. First, the trapped beings, whose consciousness fluctuated wildly between individual and collective states. Then the Afflicted, whose thoughts flowed together in harmonious streams of shared experience. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever imagined. Individual consciousness felt suddenly limited and isolated compared to the rich interconnectedness of collective thought. She could feel the emotions, memories, and experiences of dozens of beings simultaneously, creating a symphony of consciousness that was both overwhelming and beautiful. But she also understood why the trapped beings were suffering. They were caught between these two states without the biological framework to process either one properly. Their consciousness was stretched between individual and collective existence, unable to fully embrace either option. Working carefully, Sarah began to establish connections between the trapped beings and both forms of consciousness, serving as a bridge that allowed them to experience both options fully. One by one, she helped them make informed choices about their final state. Some chose to complete their transformation into collective consciousness, finding peace in the shared existence that the Afflicted offered. Others chose to return to individual consciousness, accepting the limitations of isolated thought in exchange for personal autonomy. Each choice was made with full understanding of both options, free from the confused suffering they had experienced before. When the procedure was complete, Sarah carefully withdrew from the connections, returning to purely individual consciousness with a deep appreciation for both forms of existence. The experience had shown her possibilities for consciousness that she had never imagined, but it had also reinforced her understanding of why individual consciousness was valuable and worth preserving. As she returned to her ship, Sarah carried with her the gratitude of 47 beings who had been freed to choose their own fate. Some had joined the Afflicted in their collective existence, while others were returning to their original species with new perspectives on the nature of consciousness. The political implications of the successful procedure would reverberate throughout the galaxy for years to come. The Galactic Council would eventually establish new protocols for contact with collective consciousness species, while researchers would spend decades studying the data from Sarah's experience to better understand the nature of consciousness itself. But for Sarah and her crew, the mission represented something simpler and more fundamental: proof that compassion and determination could overcome even the most complex and dangerous situations. They had risked everything to help beings in need, and their success had opened new possibilities for understanding and cooperation between different forms of conscious life. As the Mercy's hand departed Kepler 442c, Sarah looked back at the planet with its organic structures and flowing streams of consciousness. The afflicted had found their peace in collective existence, the rescued beings had chosen their own fates, and humanity had proven once again that no one should suffer alone, regardless of how alien or incomprehensible their circumstances might seem. The galaxy would never be quite the same, and that, Sarah reflected, was exactly as it should be.